Hi, I'm Mira. Welcome to another story. Let's see where this one takes us. The sun hung low over Briar's Hollow, casting long shadows across the cobbled square where villagers bustled in preparation for the harvest festival. Lenora watched from the steps of the meeting hall, her gnarled hands resting on the head of her walking stick. At 73, she no longer had the strength to string lanterns or hoist barrels of cider, but she still carried the weight of leadership. Her watchful eyes ensured no detail went astray. The village thrived on traditions, rituals passed from generation to generation as steady and unchanging as the harvest itself. Yet lately, Lenora had felt unease settle over her like a damp fog. The Veilwood loomed at the edge of the fields, its dark pines a silent reminder of old warnings and half-remembered tales. No one dared venture beyond its shadowed boundary, though Lenora couldn't say why. The fear was instinctive, ingrained like the rhythm of planting and reaping. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of soft, lilting music. A stranger approached from the path leading into the hollow, their steps measured and graceful. They were cloaked in forest green, a lute slung across their back, and their voice carried a melody that seemed to weave itself into the autumn breeze. The villagers paused their work, their murmurs rising as they turned to watch the newcomer. Strangers were rare, and this one seemed to bring with them an air of quiet authority, as though the road itself had invited them to walk it. When the stranger reached the square, they stopped and inclined their head. "Good evening," they said, their voice resonant. "I am Callan, a traveller and a teller of tales. I have come seeking shelter. In exchange, I offer my songs." Lenora stepped forward, her walking stick tapping against the cobblestones. "You've come a long way," she said, her tone polite but cautious. "Few take these roads. What brings you here?" Callan smiled faintly. "Perhaps the wind carried me, or perhaps the forest whispered its invitation. It matters little. What matters is the welcome you offer, or withhold." The words sent a chill through Lenora, though she couldn't say why. The forest whispering? She shook off the thought and gestured to the villagers. "We're preparing for our festival. If you wish to join us, you're welcome, so long as you respect our ways." "I will honour them," Callan said, bowing slightly. That evening the festival began. Lanterns swayed on strings, casting warm light over the square, where villagers danced and sang. The air was filled with the scent of spiced cider and roasted apples, and laughter rang out under the stars. Callan stood at the edge of the crowd, their lute in hand, watching with a quiet intensity. When the time came for music, they stepped onto the wooden platform and plucked the lute's strings. The notes were haunting and beautiful, wrapping around the villagers like a spell. Callan's voice rose, weaving a tale of forgotten heroes and ancient battles fought beneath shadowed trees. The villagers stilled. The song pulled at something deep within them, a sensation at once foreign and familiar. Margit, the baker, felt her heart pound with the thrill of a sword fight, though she'd never wielded a blade. Willem, the blacksmith, smelled the smoke of a distant battlefield he'd never seen. Even Lenora felt a pang of recognition. An image of the Veilwood, its trees glowing with silvery light under the full moon, and a voice calling her name. When the song ended, an uneasy silence fell over the square. Callan lowered their lute and gazed out at the crowd, their amber eyes reflecting the lantern light. "Memories are strange things," they said softly. "Sometimes they feel like gifts, and other times like echoes of something lost." Lenora rose from her chair, her voice firm. "What memories?" "You're filling their heads with stories that aren't theirs." Callan met her gaze. "Are you certain they're not?" The lanterns flickered and the breeze shifted, a chill crept into the square, and Lenora's unease deepened. "Go home," she told the villagers. "The hour grows late." The crowd dispersed slowly, their faces troubled. Only Lenora remained, her thoughts churning as she watched Callan step down from the platform and vanish into the night. The memory of the glowing forest lingered, and with it the unsettling certainty that she had seen it before. The night deepened, the Veilwood's looming shadows pressing closer to Briar's Hollow, as if the forest itself were encroaching. Lenora sat in her small, firelit kitchen, staring at the chipped mug of tea in her hands. She barely noticed its warmth. Her thoughts were on the stranger, Callan, and the song that had stirred something within her. The image of the glowing forest had been too vivid, too real to dismiss as imagination. Yet she knew it couldn't be her memory. She had never stepped into the Veilwood. No one had, not for generations. The forest had been off limits since long before her time as elder. The warnings had been simple and firm. Stay away from the Veilwood. It is not ours to tread. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Lenora rose slowly, her joints stiff, and shuffled to the entrance. Willem stood there, his broad shoulders hunched, his face pale. "It's Margit," he said, his voice taut. "She's missing." Lenora's stomach turned. "What do you mean, missing?" Willem stepped inside, his lantern casting long shadows across the walls. Her daughter said she left the house after the song ended. She kept muttering about finding something or someone. "I've searched the square, the fields. She's not anywhere in the village." Lenora gripped her walking stick tighter. "Did anyone see her leave?" "No," Willem said, "but we both know where she's gone. The Veilwood." Lenora swallowed the lump in her throat. Margit was one of the kindest people in Briar's Hollow, a baker whose laughter often filled the square. That she would wander into the forest made no sense, unless Callan's song had done more than stir memories. "We'll find her," Lenora said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "Bring your lantern." The forest loomed before them, its edges darker than the night itself. The path leading into the Veilwood was overgrown, the brambles clawing at Lenora's skirts as she pushed forward. Willem followed close behind, his lantern swinging, its weak light barely denting the oppressive gloom. The silence was unnatural. No wind rustled the branches, no animals scurried in the underbrush. Only their footsteps broke the stillness, each one seeming louder than the last. The deeper they ventured, the heavier the air became, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. "Do you feel it?" Willem whispered, his voice barely audible. Lenora nodded. She felt it too, the weight of something ancient, watching. Ahead, the path widened into a clearing. There, under the twisted branches of a massive tree, stood Margit. Her back was to them, her hands stretched out as though reaching for something just beyond. "Margit!" Lenora called, her voice cutting through the stillness. Margit turned slowly, her face pale and her eyes unfocused. "I can hear them," she said, her voice soft and dreamlike. "I can hear their voices. They're calling me." Lenora stepped forward, her walking stick sinking into the soft earth. "There's no one here, Margit. Come back with us." But Margit shook her head, her gaze drifting toward the massive tree. Its bark was blackened and gnarled, its roots sprawling like claws into the ground. Whispers drifted from its branches, soft, insistent, incomprehensible. "They're not gone," Margit murmured. "They've been here all along." Before Lenora could stop her, Margit stepped closer to the tree. The shadows seemed to thicken around her, curling upward like smoke. "Margit, no!" Lenora shouted, but the woman didn't respond. The shadows coiled tighter, pulling Margit into their depths. In an instant, she was gone, the whispers fading as the clearing fell silent. Willem staggered back, his face ashen. She just disappeared. What was that?" Lenora stared at the tree, her heart pounding. The whispers had gone silent, but their echoes lingered in her mind, accompanied by fragments of memory she couldn't ignore. A circle of villagers standing under the same tree, their hands joined, their voices raised in solemn oath. She had been there. She had spoken the words. The Veilwood had not always been forbidden. It had once been part of their lives, as much a part of Briar's Hollow as the harvest itself. Lenora closed her eyes, the weight of realization settling over her. "The Veilwood isn't taking her," she said quietly. "It's calling her back." Willem stared at her, his expression torn between fear and confusion. "Back to what?" Lenora hesitated. "Something we forgot, something we tried to leave behind." A soft melody drifted through the clearing, pulling their attention. Callan stepped into view, their lutes slung across their back, their amber eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You came?" they said, their tone calm and unsurprised. "I thought you might." Lenora gritted her teeth. "What is this? What happened to Margit?" "She returned to the Pact," Callan said simply, "as you must. The Veilwood doesn't forget, Elder, it remembers its promises. Do you?" Lenora felt the forest close in around her, its presence undeniable. The memories clawed at her mind, demanding to be acknowledged. The Pact wasn't gone, it had simply been waiting for them to return. The clearing felt alive, the air heavy with whispers that seemed to rise from the ground itself. The massive tree loomed like a sentinel, its gnarled roots spreading wide and deep, and its bark shimmering faintly as though with an inner pulse. Lenora gripped her walking stick tightly, her knuckles white as she faced Callan. Willem stood frozen at her side, his lantern shaking in his hand, its light flickering weakly. "What pact?" Lenora demanded, her voice hard but unsteady. "What promises? We've lived here for generations without your riddles or this forest trying to take us." Callan stepped closer, their lute hanging loosely at their side, their expression calm but piercing. "Have you? Truly? Or have you simply forgotten the cost of your comfort? The Veilwood has always been here, and so have you. But nothing comes without a price, Elder. You knew that once." Lenora opened her mouth to retort, but the words caught in her throat. The whispers surged again, louder now, a rising tide of half-formed voices, and with them came memories. Flashes of moonlit ceremonies, the village gathered beneath the Veilwood's canopy. Hands joined, voices raised, words spoken in unison, words of gratitude, of reverence and of offering. She staggered, leaning heavily on her walking stick. The memories were clearer now, undeniable. The Veilwood had been a part of Briar's Hollow's prosperity. Its soil, its water, its protection, it had given all of this freely. But the Pact had required something in return, and they had abandoned it. Lenora's voice trembled as she spoke. "We left this behind, for good reason. Whatever the Pact was, it cost too much." Callan's gaze softened, though their voice remained steady. "The forest has always been fair. It only asks for what it is owed, and when you stopped giving, it waited, but it will wait no longer." Willem found his voice raw with fear. "Margit didn't owe anything. She didn't agree to any of this." "Margit remembered," Callan said gently. "She heard the call and answered it. She chose to return, to give herself to the balance." "She didn't choose," Willem roared, his voice breaking. "The forest took her." Callan turned to him, their amber eyes gleaming. "Do you think the Veilwood forces you? Or does it only awaken what's already inside you?" They gestured to the massive tree. "You can see her, can't you?" Lenora and Willem turned toward the tree. Its bark shimmered faintly again, and in the knotted grooves and hollows they could see Margit's face. She was still, her features serene, her form blending seamlessly with the wood. It was as though she were part of the tree itself, a fragment of life bound to something ancient. "She doesn't look hurt," Willem whispered, his voice faltering. "She looks peaceful." Lenora tore her gaze away, her breath shallow. The weight of her leadership pressed on her now more than ever. The village's prosperity, its survival, everything had been tied to the Veilwood. She had inherited this role without questioning what had been left behind. She had thought the stories were just that, stories. "What happens if we refuse?" she asked, her voice low. Callan studied her, their expression unreadable. "Then the balance tips. The Veilwood will take what it is owed, and not on its own terms. It will grow wild, untamed. The village will wither, as will everything you've built upon its gifts." Lenora's jaw tightened. She looked at Willem, his face a mask of confusion and fear. Then her gaze returned to the tree, to the faint outline of Margit's face. The forest had been patient, but now its patience had run out. "What do I do?" she asked, the words heavy on her tongue. Callan stepped forward, their voice softening. "Return to the Pact. Lead your people back to what they once were. Show the Veilwood that you remember." Lenora's mind raced. The idea of asking the village to sacrifice, even to prosper, made her stomach twist. But the memory of the Pact was vivid now, undeniable. It wasn't just an exchange of goods, it was a bond, a symbiosis between the people and the forest. They had broken that bond, and now the village was in danger of losing everything. She turned to Willem. "Go back to the square, gather everyone, tell them the forest has called." "What are you going to do?" he asked. Lenora stared at the tree, the whispers once again rising around her. "I'm going to remind it who we are." The villagers gathered by lantern light at the edge of the Veilwood, their faces pale and uncertain. Lenora stood before them, her walking stick planted firmly in the soil. Callan stood at her side, their lutes silent for now, though their presence seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. The Veilwood is not our enemy, Lenora began, her voice strong despite the weight in her chest. It has given to us for generations, and we've forgotten what it asked in return. Tonight, we honour the Pact. She turned and stepped into the forest, the villagers following hesitantly behind her. Together they entered the clearing where the great tree stood waiting. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and Lenora raised her hands, her voice trembling but resolute as she spoke the words that had been etched into her mind. The forest stilled. The air seemed to hum with approval, the shadows retreating as the tree's light grew brighter. For the first time in decades, the balance was restored, and the Veilwood remembered. Thanks for listening. If the story stuck with you, come back next time for another journey.